Hi, this is Luke Robbins, and this is my final project for game 470. So I guess I'll just start by playing the scene here. So managed to get rid of all the warnings on build, get everything cleaned up so that it just compiles nicely here. My final scene actually ended up being quite different from my original plan, based on a couple of things that just happened to occur as I was putting it together, and just things I ended up liking and keeping in the scene. Originally, I was thinking, I'm a big space buff, so I was gonna make, either shuttle, or actually hoping that there was some free model of one of the Falcon 9 or Heavy, but it seems like good models are hard to come by, and I quickly learned that people don't make those things for free. So my final scene, as you can see here, is not exactly a ship on the pad. I was testing out different height maps, and once I saw this one, I loved how it would look like this kind of like craggy, like, alien asteroid thing. It looked like the asteroid from Armageddon, and I was just like, okay, this could be interesting. And so I picked a night or sort of space themed wispy kind of skybox to use here, and went to work. So here we go. So I know you're already going to kill me because I used both the frigate and the cottage, but they definitely did both have their place, as I'll go over here. So here we've got our astronaut guy, who is visiting this place, and because an astronaut needed a ship, couldn't really find any ships that had texture or were kind of working for me. And so honestly, this was kind of perfect. So we've got the frigate kind of hovering here where this guy came down. And here's the astronaut themselves. The frigate, it's got a little light coming down to illuminate what's below it. And here we see this friendly little alien guy that I found online. And, I kind of thought it was this scene of, we've got our astronaut who's landed, and this guy has kind of, come and seen them, and now going to sort of guide him along. And here, this cottage over here, I was thinking, okay, maybe this guy has established a bit of a, an outpost over here. And the reason I used this one was because I couldn't get Maya to work on my computer, or sort of that software, and I wanted to use something with multiple meshes to demonstrate that graphic object class. And although it looks like it's all one texture, I've got sort of the door here made out of the crate face. I thought maybe like he kind of like tore that off something in his spaceship maybe. I used a couple other textures testing it out, but they kind of look weird in the scene. And so I kind of went with the philosophy that this guy kind of cobbled together some stuff that he found here while he's kind of waiting and not on his ship or something. So we've got this guy kind of like moving up and down in the light over here, and the frigate, which is hovering, and I added a little spotlight on top of it with some high specular values here, and just kind of like giving it, kind of that glow that you'd expect from, a spacecraft in some of its, the LEDs that you'll find on here. In terms of light, we've got one coming down here, we've got one over there, and we've got, our spotlight there. So this thing, I thought in the context, I was looking for something to be moving, and I was like, you know what, it'd be cool if he's kind of got like this, like, it's almost like helper profiler thing to kind of go and kind of praise the situation of where he's at, and kind of maybe map the area and provide, a little more context for him while he's here. And so this thing is moving around, and it's projecting a spotlight down onto the ground to illuminate it, and there's actually a second spotlight that's going up against it, because these are two different graphic objects here. So all of these guys are, you know, multiple light things, so they've got multiple lights that can shine on them, while this is graphic object, just color light. And so I needed a separate light source shining up back at this guy. And, you know, I kind of thought, okay, we've got these craggy hills, and, you know, we've got this thing shining a light, and it's a good thing this guy has this thing out here profiling, because hiding here amongst the peaks, we see red versions of our alien guy who are hiding out here, and I thought that they're like the evil aliens. And so, I don't know. It was kind of a, you know, a cool little scene. I thought it worked out pretty nicely. It seems like there's kind of a light coming from here, and so, you know, we're looking down here, and there's a little bit of extra light, just a little spot. And yeah, that's about it. So that's moving around. We've got our frigate, we've got our alien, we've got our astronaut guy. The astronaut guy is definitely not perfect here. He gave me a lot of trouble because, like I said, I couldn't get the graphics software going. And so this is actually quite a large model that I had to scale, and as a result, it plays all hell with things like fog and lighting, and he just does not play well. But here he's got a little, you know, panel on his face with some, I don't know, I thought it looked like sort of like a nice heads-up display or something, and then the rest of them over here. And yeah, that's just about it for the scene. So I went for breadth, or I guess we'll look here. Everything seems to be okay over here. I tried this on my other computer, and I was seeing some of those memory leak, like from COM object or whatever DirectX memory leaks, but I don't know what the deal is. But it looks fine here, and I will run it again and see what the deal is. Anyway, so for this project, I wanted to go for breadth and try, you know, a lot of things out and sort of have a nice variety of things going on to test them out and kind of demonstrate all the stuff we've had going on over the course of this semester. And so that's reflected in my graphic objects. So you can see there's the base over here. There's a graphic object that's just color light, obviously. Name is pretty self-explanatory. There's one for different meshes, and that's where the cottage comes in. There's one for multiple lights, which is you know, useful for things like the alien and you know, the astronaut and the frigate. We've got the sky, which uses texture but is not affected by light, and so that uses a different shader. We've got terrain. So terrain and sky. Instead of making, you know, terrain model and sky into the graphic object, I decided it would be more kind of more uniform if I just made these objects like I did with models, and in the same way kind of wrap them up with their associated shaders and that kind of information. So I did that. And then terrain just wraps that, and then there's one for just texture but no light. Kind of generalizing what I did over here with sky. Our models, skybox, all that stuff, and then associated shaders. So there's one for multiple lights, one for light and color, one for texture, and one for texture and light. And we'll see how those are used. So just over here, we can see creating the models that are used in the scene. Astronaut. This one was not used. This was kind of playing around with the color light one earlier. I take that back. This model was used for the little satellite that goes around. The robot or alien, the ship, the skybox and the terrain, and outpost, which is just the mesh textured cottage. A bunch of different worlds. There's actually, I could have done this for these, but I was kind of adding them as I went along, and it was nice to have these individual ones to quickly refer to. The evil robot worlds, but since I was spawning a number of these and just changing the world, it was kind of easier to just store them this way and iterate through, and that way it didn't clutter up my my draw stage more than, because it's not cluttered, but there's quite a lot going on at this point. And then just a vector for this satellite spotlight position, and then my shaders. color, multiple lights, shader, text, just to coordinate my textures. This is what I was going to pass, or this is what I did pass to, or I could pass to my multiple meshes class. One for the astronaut, and so on, and you get the picture, and then the graphic objects to wrap them. Color light for the pyramid and the satellite. This is what I meant. I did not use this one. That was kind of a prototype, and satellite ended up being kind of the one that I used, astronaut ship and all that. It's kind of big terrain, and mesh example is what the outpost is, and you can see, it didn't fit quite as well in the scene as some of the other elements, but as I said, I really wanted to have a multiple meshes example, and that one kind of fit in with what was going on. So in a demo, I tried to, instead of doing everything specific to a single object or model and moving on to the next one, I have kind of found it cleaner to, split up those elements and group the actual, type of things together. So I created all my shaders, loaded all the models, astronaut, model, robot, ship, and so outpost, loaded up the textures in that array, loaded up the individual textures, created the graphic objects with their relevant shader and model, and set texture where appropriate. And so we can see passing in a whole array. And then once you do that, you can set texture with a single one, which will overwrite all of them, all the textures, and then you can set an individual one within the array that's owned by that object. Setting up some of the worlds, and this is the astronaut, which was very fun. I found a couple of models online that were like aliens or something, not like other vaguely humanoid shapes that were like could have worked, and even though the astronaut gave me so many problems, I wanted to use an astronaut. I wanted it to be a human, and it was a frigate, and I just felt like it would have felt wrong. So I muscled through, even if it was difficult and not perfect. My worlds, just a position that's going to be updated when we're sort of moving our satellite around, setting worlds for our other objects, and then we're on our way here. In the update scene, I update in world 6, which is used for the satellite. And draw scene is where the magic happens. Set clear target view and depth stencil view. Render skybox. So set shader to context. Set cam matrices. Set skybox. And then render. So skybox, then astronaut. Set shader to context and cam matrices. Set fog parameters, send fog parameters, and then set spotlight parameters, send shader light parameters, and then render, and then reset that again. And so there's kind of a lot to unpack here, so I'll go through this. So this is pretty typical. Setting the fog parameters. I wrapped up so much like shaders and lighting within the objects themselves, but fog I decided to leave to the shader itself, because fog is affecting everything, and there's really only should be a single fog going on for each set of objects in a certain shader. I just left that separate. Set spotlight parameters. Originally, I was having a lot of difficulty because I was treating the graphic objects like we did during the sort of assignment that we used them for, but those were pretty basic graphic objects, and we were only using one or two of them in a scene. And so when I started putting some of these together, I was running into issues where I was having to fix up the light, and I was like, okay, where the heck did that light setting come from? And also, some of them were running into each other, so I was like, okay, you know what? I don't want these to be hard-coded when I create the object or when I render or having to fiddle with them individually. I just want to be able to this object is doing this with this light. And I think that ended up working out a lot better. And so here you see pretty standard code with the spotlight parameters as you would when doing it with a shader. Except in this case, this number here is the index in the array of lights. And so I have an array of 3 spotlights, and that index in the array is what's being set there. So that's a single light. And the fog, as I said, I was willing to, add in a hack or two in order to make the astronaut quote unquote work. And so here, normally I would only have to set the fog parameters once for a single shader, but here I set them because I had to scale back that model down so much that I just had to, have a different value for this specific model, and then the rest of them would work otherwise. And then I set this back to a more reasonable value of 800 here, and that's what works on the rest of the multi-light owning objects. And so the ship is affected by that. Same thing, send spotlight, and this one also sends point light because I wanted that kind of above the ship, not shining down from any particular source, but kind of emanating from, all the different lights that would be kind of on top of there, and that single little specular point, which actually ended up being quite a nice effect that, to be totally honest, was a bit of an accident. Here we go. Yep, setting that. Setting the robot / alien. Set the context. Set the world. Because, and this happens in the draw stage because, as I showed you, it's kind of doing that little slight floating up and down just because I thought it would give it a little bit more, life and give it a more, alien-like kind of approach. My pyramid, which was a prototype, which ended up being, useful when I was creating what ended up being satellite. And so I'll skip to the satellite for a second and then get back to the terrain. Satellite was graphic object color light. And so in a similar way, I set the spotlight, set the world, set the fog, and we're off to the races here. Terrain, set the context, set K matrices, set spotlight things, and then render. Actually, I guess I didn't have to come back to it. It was relatively straightforward. It was the aliens where I kind of iterated through all the world positions, and I set the world of each individual one, rendered, and then continued. In my outpost, setting a spotlight for that guy. Spotlight. This uses a differentiator, so it doesn't have an index. The mesh texture one only has a single light because I kind of wanted to separate that from the lights class a bit because they were kind of getting pretty similar. And then present. Here we go, deleting everything here. As I said, I wasn't getting any errors at all, and I tested it on my other laptop, and I don't know if I'm just not getting it on this laptop, and there's some setting that I'd have to change, but it seems fine, and I think I'm doing everything correctly within my classes, but anyway, I think it's right, but I'm sure you will find that out when you run it as well. So there's all those. I think I covered a decent amount when I was going through this. In terms of demo, let me just show you this. Actually, no, I'm going to come back to the mirror. So the mirror I did not implement in my final scene, obviously, and that one I did separately in its own project, and I'll kind of go through that. But let me just take a look at the grading checklist. Without warning, basic asserts. Yep, it's got all the newest versions of things like the model class and things like that. Final scene. Skybox terrain, pre-made models, file loaded, things like that. Placed in the scene, aesthetically interesting. I thought it was pretty cool, but obviously that is your call. Definitely not slapped together. I did spend a lot of time fiddling with this thing, and I did make sure to fix the skybox so there's no seams. That would have been very bad in a dark scene. So it's multiple light sources. They do respond to lighting effects. Lighting effects make sense. Skybox is not affected by light. At least one directional light. Yep, there is multiple 3-point sources or multiple spotlight sources. We've got a couple point lights, and then we've got multiple spotlights. We've got a spotlight coming down from the frigate. We've got one floating around with along with the satellite. So there's one shining down from the satellite, and then because I wanted the satellite to be lit and obviously be a light producing source, there's one shooting up at the satellite, and then I believe there's actually another one providing a little bit of light that looks like it's coming from kind of a point in the skybox. At least one light source should be moving. There's the satellite. Moving to satellite to show those effects. So yeah, I believe I showed this with the evil aliens hiding in the hills as light passes overhead and they're illuminated. And obviously the terrain is illuminated as the satellite moves. Judicious fog effect. Yep, there's fog in there as I showed you. As I talk, I'll load this up so I can show you a bit better because I didn't highlight that. But I kind of made it a bit less than I had it earlier because we didn't get a chance to look into making fog work quite well with texture. So it doesn't look fantastic if it gets too strong too quickly. So I kind of made it a bit less than it was before. But we'll take a look at that now just to show you. And so as you move away, you sort of start to see these things fade into the distance. And it kind of becomes this like slightly bluish color. And then as we move closer, that fades away. And once again, here's one light, two lights, third light coming up, and then this guy right here from our sort of mystery floaty source up here. Premium models. So we've got our flat plane and skybox. Use the latest version. They exist in multiple versions of face texturing options. As we see in our model tools class. As we see in our model tools class. There we go. We've got our regular unit box, which is not really light affected here. It's just using its 8 points, or I'm sorry, it's using its, it's 8 points at the corners, and so it's sharing those vertices amongst the faces, so that doesn't affect. We've got our unit box with the repeated texture, which does have UV and normals. And here, front, back, left, right. And it's just, for this one's pretty easy. For the faces, it's pretty intuitive. It's just the way it should be going. Create Unibox 6 face texture. Yep, that's the one just using the texture that we had earlier in the semester. Might as well. Create Unit Pyramid. This one without lighting. Wrap texture. Here we go. And so update norm is a private method that does exactly what you think. It kind of takes in, so when I create the normal for each face, I go through and, so I set it here with no normal, and then what I do is, here we go, so update norm. So if a vertex is at 0, then I set it to whatever the value is. So if the vertex has not been set yet, then I set it to whatever this is. And if not, I sum it with the new one that's coming in. Or I sum it with the face, exactly. So like here, take a vertex, sum it with the normal of the face, because for each of these faces, that's going to be, for this face, this is going to be the normal based on the vertices and kind of that counterclockwise winding. So that n equals b minus a cross c minus a. And I do that for each of these. And then I update them accordingly. And eventually the end result for each vertex is correct. And now it's time to get to the bane of my existence. So the sphere class is not done. And it's not done because I have some sort of mental block. I was able to create the terrain skybox. I was able to get texture on the skybox. I was able to light the skybox. But the sphere, I probably spent 12 hours of my life on and just could not get it to work. Something about this is I just can't get it to wind correctly or put the vertices in the right place. I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but basically I have one I took the code to make, cylinder going around, basically radius at each point, and then there's kind of xval. Yeah, I'm not going to spend time on this. You know how it works. I know in principle how it works. Go around creating all the vertices. There's a top vertex, a bottom vertex. So I basically created it like a cylinder that's open at the top and the bottom, and then create that last point to connect. And then winding the triangles. Ha! Or attempting to. And then my private update norm methods. Yeah. Sphere, I tried to work it out. I tried to, look at other methods like the icosahedron. I tried to adapt, code that I found online to work for the situation, but it just did not work. Okay. Rant over, sorry. Pre-made models, done, except for good old Sphere. Model class has constructors for pre-made models, models from file, and using arrays of those. Yep, has all that. So we've got our standard vertex over here, all our setter methods, private load data GPU, load from file. We've got our pre-made models over here. Yeah, we've got ones from lists of vertices, all of that. Yep. Whole or specified mesh. We already saw that already. Oops. Wrong one. Loading from file, and GPU, and all the mesh data that we got from over the semester. Skybox. Yep, so it does act like it is built to scale. It does act like its own specialized graphic object, and it receives size, pointer of the texture. Call surrounding should deal with the shader as well as the model correctly. So our graphic object, skybox, over here. We've got a shader texture, but no light. We've got a texture we can use, matrix, and a skybox object here. We can set the skybox, set the texture, the worlds, and GAM matrices, all that. So we set the skybox. So we take in that skybox that we've created outside and wrap that here. We combine that with the shader and texture. We can just put that. We can change texture here. And here we go, just rendering. So terrain is similar approach. Set to context, wrap this shader color multiple lights, unlike the skybox is affected by light. Terrain model, matrix. For this one, I set a couple of, so here's a couple of spotlight positions, 0, 1, 2. I do set point light and some directional within here. Since I basically, this was going to be the class of the graphic objects that really set some of the point and spotlight to give some of that sort of ambient light. Got rid of some other classes in here. Set texture, set world, set spotlight positions, set shader context, and render. Terrain model class, terrain class. Yep, like a graphics object, built to scale, UV mapping with repeats. Vertex normal has average of the faces. So let's take a closer look at terrain model. So as we saw earlier, this was just sort of mapping it out a bit. Load up all the information from the height map. Create our standard vertex and triangle ones, and this is a familiar loop. We normalize those values that are coming in here, and the Y value is going to be those height map pixels with the texel index function that we created down here. Then triangle winding, sort of start at the top left-hand corner, create all those vertices, wind the faces, which obviously work as you saw within the actual demo, using a similar update norm. Oh yeah, and here are the normals. Sorry. Here's the triangle winding, and then which works, and here's the updating the face normals, which uses that similar thing. So the way I did it was basically I go down each row, and then I go to the vertex and I go, okay, we're gonna set you. If you haven't been set, here's your value. If not, we're gonna average your current value with this new value, and that's your new value, and that sets it to that normal. World matrices, update norm, render, and here's all the helper functions like texel index, normalizing, and things like that. Shader classes, there's color and texture base, use lighting, there's multiple lights of the same spot, it's got default settings. Here's some of my shaders over here. Here's the multiple lights one, for instance. And so for multiple light, we've got this one does use fog, so we've got our structive fog data. It's textured, so here's the constant buffers for that. In terms of lighting, we've got spotlight that holds 3. Instance data, fog data. I just put that struct in a constant buffer here. And then going down to actually calculating some of the stuff, and this is all we've seen before. Looping through, computing each spotlight and adding that to the ambient, diffuse, and specular value. And so now we've got our lit color, and then we add the fog. Fog. So in terms of default value, I just gave it kind of a ridiculously huge sort of starting value, so it's going to be well beyond whatever the scene is. I saw someone else did it like they would set it at -1, and if distance to eye is greater than 0, add it, otherwise don't. That's a pretty good approach too. I was thinking about modifying it to that. It seems a bit cleaner, but what I have has been working for now, and I think it's pretty good. Texture light is also incorporates fog, and here we go, fog start, all that stuff, and I believe this one is just a single light. And texture light was used, what was texture light used for? May have used that in the multiple meshes, I believe so. And then same old. This one just as a single one, computes it with the texture, and then adds in the fog. In terms of the actual shader classes themselves, we've got things for setting directional point and spotlights. There's one for setting spotlight parameters. In mult lights, there's one for setting, you can set this, and it will just combine them all into one. So effectively you have one light. Or you can set, or just, set them all to the same one, or you can set an individual index. Set fog parameters, send fog parameters, here's texture, and then all the various structs, and here's one for 3 lights, and fog data and all the different handles. And in CPP we've got this guy properly set up with 32 bytes, offset from the initial position. Fog defaults, like I said, just a ridiculous initial value. And then all of these buffers over here. And then deleting them as they should be. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4 deleted. And then everything we've seen before, setting this, and here we go, we set them all to the same one if we just get without an index, or we set the specific index to that value. And then when we're sending light parameters, we collect all the spotlights, all the spotlight information set at each index in the data light parameters, and then update that sub resource. And then here, here's just sending that initial fog, and then here's Setting that to context. Graphic objects corresponding to different shaders for color, texture, and their light version. Receiving pointers for shader and model. Memory properties. Somebody said it on a per mesh basis. Rendering method, automating the required shader, and model operations. Yep. So let's go back to some of those graphic objects again. Here's one for mesh texture. In the constructor, you can take in an array of textures, or you can take in a single texture, which will kind of fill all of them with that information. Here's the model, the shader that we're using, setting up that information, sending some initial light parameters. Generally, these are pretty low. And then here's a single one parameter. You can do things like set the texture or set all the textures, set the world, set spotlight position, or set spotlight parameters entirely, because depending on what the level of control or how much you have to change, if you don't have to update all that stuff, setting light parameters. And then in the rendering stage, for this one, you can loop through all the different meshes rendering, or you can just render with a single mesh. Here's just color light, similar approach. This one just shader, model, good to go. You can set your color, set your world, and this is more of the basic shape object. And in the renderer, we send world material, send light parameters, and then render. And so automated those operations like it talks about in here. And then finally, DXApp changes. Yep, I think it's relatively streamlined. Everything is kind of grouped together as it should be. Everything kind of makes sense. I've wrapped as much in the graphics objects as I thought made sense, and then let the shaders do a couple of other operations in the draw scene. Mirror with texture and multiple lights. I'm not incorporating it in my actual scene, but I was sort of working on this in my other project, and I'll probably just try and finish that up just to have that for the future. But in terms of mirror, let's get this going. So here we go. I've got a couple of cubes and a couple of light sources going on with that similar sort of multiple lights shader and associated class. And so here we've got this cube lighting up as it drifts up and down. This guy kind of spinning with a couple of lights and just one going directly down there. And for some reason I could not get the light to work on this, even though it just seems exactly like I had that go in. I'll go through the code in a second, but basically I got some light to show up, but not all the light. But obviously I think I'm just looking in the wrong place, because everything that I'm focusing on seems to make sense. So this was kind of cobbled together, obviously, from the existing kind of code that we had showing up from just simple colored objects. And so here I've just added the shader texture mult lights, which is, I think pretty much exactly the same as the one that I showed you in my main project. It's got things for, setting these parameters. It's got, index spotlight data. This one also takes in 3. In the multiple lights shader, we've got, here we go, 3 spotlights, so-and-so. And then the magic happens here, kind of in DXApp first. Here's shader setting directional and point light in just init demo here. And then loading up a couple textures like you saw, setting it to context. Here's our models. I kind of split this up like I said. It's the world. Here's a couple of positions that I was going to use for the lighting. The mirror object is kind of hidden under here since that didn't change. An update scene. Moving the smaller cube. Okay, so first I render everything in front of the mirror. So I set the shader that I'm using for these boxes to context. Set spotlight parameters 0, 1, and 2 with a different. So here's position, negative position dot get norm. So position and then direction of light. Pos 2, position and direction of light. Position, direction of light. Send those light parameters. Send world of material for the plane and each object, and then render. And then, as you saw, those show up nicely and are lit, and as they're moving around. Step 2, mark the mirror pixels. I did not modify this. And then step 3, windings. Switch this up, and then finally, set this one back to context. And then when I send the light parameters again, I multiply the position by the reflection matrix, and I multiply the direction by the reflection matrix, get the norm of that result, and set that. I do that for all three of those, send the light parameters, and then for each object, send the world material and render. And lo and behold, it did not happen. So I'm really trying to track down what the issue was, but I've spent hours on this, and I think the issue is that I just can't get my head off the fact that I don't know what's wrong, that it's probably something not even in this section that's doing it. I understand conceptually what's going on with the mirror, but I could not understand why, multiplying these properly by the reflection matrix, what I'm missing. So step 4, set shader color back to context when I'm rendering the actual physical mirror itself. Rendering that, sending, turns off that. Shader call, send world color, and render the wall behind the mirror. And that's just with the color. And then present. So here's lights. Nothing in the mirror. Lights on here. Even if it was faint, I would expect to see a little bit showing up over here. I don't think it's just too faint to see. I think it's just genuinely not showing up. Anyway, so with that checked off, that's just about it. So it looks like the main two things missing. I'm sure you'll find other things wrong with it, but the main two things that are missing are sphere and getting the multiple lights to show up in the textured mirror. And in terms of things that I had to say about it, models, graphic objects, nothing new, creating the final scene, multiple lights, adding fog, adding mirror. So, just run for you one more time. So I guess this is the final thoughts section. For all its frustrations, and there have definitely been many, this is definitely a fun assignment, and definitely enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. I have no graphics background at all, and I wasn't sure what to expect coming in, but I definitely struggled with a lot of things in this class, but in the end I was definitely pretty satisfied to see some of this stuff coming together. So it's really cool, and yeah, this was good. I'm pretty proud of this scene in my API, and I think I'll just have to clean it up and keep exploring the Frank Luna book. So I guess that's just about it. Alright, on to the next student.